Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Crisol Escobedo, and I teach philosophy. And Liz, if you want to.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm so glad to see you all. And I want to especially thank Yasmin and the Pasos group and Crisol for inviting me to the conversation. I'm really excited about this.
So the title of our presentation is College Life, Attributing Success to Students. And I want to explain the title a little bit. You'll make the connections once we're done with the presentation, but just to kind of give you a heads up, College Life is referring to a project that Dr. Acosta and I are starting. And at the end, we're going to make our pitch to see if anybody would like to join us. And one of the activities that we have already done has to do with changing students' views on who they can attribute success to. And basically what we want to do is show our students and have our students realize that success is something that is in their control. We're constantly talking about all these opportunities that we can provide as a college, as instructors, and that's great, but ultimately the purpose of this program or project is going to be to motivate students so that they can take that power into their own hands. So I want to give you a little bit of background on how the project started. There's going to be an equity component to all of this because this is sort of the baby that came out of a lot of projects I've been working on related to equity. So I'll also talk about the focus of the project, which are social psychological interventions. And then we're going to talk about college life. So Dr. Acosta is going to talk about the event that we had and also just potential research or future projects that can come from this. So let's start with what is equity. So just some personal history. I was part of equity committee that Lucia Rodriguez was the chair of, and that's how I was introduced to equity formally. So I was an invited guest into the committee, and it was a great committee because we not only had a lot of information on what equity was, the history of striving for equity in the college, but we also talked about and planned out events where we would have students be aware of equity issues, faculty as well, and administrators. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is shaped by the work that I did when I was part of that committee. And then also another group that I'll talk about in a little bit. So the main importance to recognize is that there's a difference between equity and equality. So I like this graphic a lot, and there's other graphics out there, but I really do like this graphic because it demonstrates the difference between equality and equity. So equality is when everybody gets the same thing. And in this picture, it's demonstrated by the stools being the same size. Equity, on the other hand, is recognizing that there are different backgrounds. Not everybody's coming from the same background. Not everybody's had the same opportunities. So what needs to happen is that the resources need to be available. And because there's all this diverse background, right, what one student needs might not be the same for another student. So I think this image captures that because we have two different students, different heights, and if we were to give both students the same size stool, one of the students wouldn't be able to reach the books. But if we accommodate, if we go ahead and give maybe the student who's shorter a bigger stool, then the student is able to reach the books. So There's way more to equity than this, but this is just a very short introduction on what equity is. As a committee, we worked on various projects, like I said. So EPCC does have a lot, or is sponsoring a lot of efforts to promote equity. And out of the many, many different things that we did as part of the committee, two of those should be highlighted. One of them is that we came up with our own equity graphic. So I'm displaying that there. And another one is that there was an equity statement that was created by the committee and approved by the board. So we have an official EPCC equity statement thanks to the effort of everybody in that committee. So then equity has been a focus in what I do, not just when I teach, but also other projects. And it could be my experience, or maybe some of you will share that experience. But when I started learning about equity, I started thinking, well, how can I integrate this into the classroom? And one of the things that I noticed about my students in my classes is that I was losing a lot of them. And I know we're not supposed to take it personally, but I was a little bit sad about that. I should say a lot. Because I was thinking, well, what am I doing? How come they don't want me? So I started trying to figure out what I can do in the classroom to retain my students. I do a lot of things with them, and those who stay, for the most part, I would say about 95% of them are successful. But the problem that I've been having in my classes is that I lose a lot of them, and that's something that tortures me almost daily, because I don't like that. I don't want that to happen. So in my efforts, I joined the faculty working group that is under the supervision of Dr. Michael. Erica in her presentation made reference to that. We're part of the same cohort. So the point of me joining the group was to figure out new ways in which I could motivate my students to stay. And one of the articles that we read focused on something called social psychological interventions, which is what I'm briefly going to present on today. And then once I'm done giving you just like a quick overview of what these are, we're going to talk about the College Life Project and one event in particular that we've already had with all of this in mind. So what are social psychological interventions? So this quote here is taken by an article by Yeager and Walton, and it defines what a social intervention is. So I'm just going to read that. In recent years, several rigorous randomized field experiments have shown that seemingly small social psychological interventions, typically brief exercises that do not teach academic content, but instead target students' thoughts, feelings, and beliefs in and about school, have had striking effects on educational achievement even over months and years. So basically, these are interventions that can happen that don't have to connect to academic content, so they're separate, but they're very important because they target the student's experience, not just their thoughts and feelings, but also beliefs about the value of their education and the place that they hold in their environment. So they can be very powerful. The thing about these interventions, however, is that it's not enough for you to tell students that these psychological interventions influence them and that they are successful, because the moment that you do that, they lose their effect. So there's this sort of mysticism around them. As I said, they are separate from course content, so they have nothing to do with the field that you're teaching. It's more about the interactions that you have with students and how that promotes the interactions that they will have with you and also other students and just those around them. So the way that these work is because they actually motivate students to accomplish their goals. And again, it's done not by saying, oh, by the way, if you do this, you are more likely to succeed. it's sort of hidden in interventions that we have to do. And then I'll give you some examples later on. So the idea here is that we change students' views in order to enhance the learning opportunities. And this is taken from social psychological research. Basically, it's an analysis of how we act out in the world, what affects our attitudes and our behaviors. And I do have a quote there that I'm not going to read everything, but one of the things that I do have want to highlight is a sentence. Let me use my pointer here in the middle here that says, the quality of students developing relationship with peers and teachers, their beliefs about their ability, and their acquisition of academic knowledge. So these are the factors that are important. And these are not supposed to just change behaviors and attitudes in just one moment. They're supposed to have lasting effects. But again, the way that these are carried out is very significant. So there's a couple of lessons we can learn from this. The first one is that we do need to provide the learning opportunities. They have to be present, because without them, then the student is not going to be successful. So going back to the equity image, right? There has to be those tools there for students to be successful. If we put, again, making the analogy or the reference to the image there, if we put books really high up where nobody can reach them, then students are not going to be able to benefit from them being there, the books being there. So we do need to provide those learning opportunities. We need to make sure that that happens. But we also need to change behavior. So sometimes I feel like people forget this, but the purpose of college and education in general is to have a transformative experience. We talk about completing degrees, and that's great. You know, that's one of the things that we should be doing, right? Making sure that students do get their degree. But we sometimes forget about that transformative experience. And that's one of the lessons here that we can learn from social psychology, that if we want that transformative experience, we need to work at changing behavior. And there are different ways in which we can have that happen. So there are ways in which we can increase or promote behavior by giving them incentives for good grades, for example. And there are forces that actually restrain behavior. So for example, if students have a negative stereotype of who they are, or like they're worried about negative stereotypes and how people might perceive them negatively because they belong to a group that has been marginalized, or there's a lot of stereotypes about it, then that will actually like restrain their behavior in terms of completion or doing well in college. So then one of the things that we do want to do is target that subjective experience in students. One of the things that will make social psychological interventions have those lasting effects is that we are essentially changing attitudes in students so that then the behavior gets reinforced by themselves. So again, this notion that the power is in the students, and we can provide the venue, we can provide the opportunity, but for us to say we give students the power seems a little contradictory, because students themselves are the ones that have the power. And what we want to do is just bring that out. So out of the many psychological interventions that I learned about, the one that really called to my attention is this notion of attributions, basically talking about how students react to the situations around them and how we can change that. So for example, if they get a bad grade, right, their attributions will determine how they will react to those grades and whether they continue with the course or not. So what some studies have found is that those students who look at their grades, say they got a failing grade, and say, well, the reason why I got a failing grade was because my teacher was too tough. The assignment was not clear. Or if they say things like, well, it was out of my control. didn't know what the instructor wanted. So when they attribute their failure or alternatively their success to somebody other than themselves, then the likelihood for them to continue is going to decrease. But if on the other hand they say things like, well, let me see what I did and let me see what I can do to change this particular outcome that I don't like, then there's more probability that they will continue with the course. So that was the main focus of what I want to do, focus on changing that type of behavior. And the reason for that is because of something I already mentioned, that the students who stay in my class are very successful, or have a high success rate, because I do a lot of things with them. I work with them. I you know, provide the opportunities for them to build their skills. But the issue is that a lot of my students just stop coming to class. So the idea here is that if maybe the change occurs in those attributions, then more students will stay. So again, there's a lot of studies done, and there's a lot of information that will help, you know, with those social psychological interventions. A couple of them that I do want to talk about, because there's something that I would like to do with the project, and so I hope Dr. Acosta, and she'll say more about that. So I don't want to say or speak for her, but one of the things that they found was, for example, that if students were shown videos of upperclassmen talking about their struggles in college and how they were able to overcome those challenges, and they just didn't give up, right? That at first it was difficult, but then they adapted. Participants were 80% less likely to drop out of college, and that's huge. There's another study by Blackwell et al., which says that there's a difference or the way that students perceive their intelligence really does matter. So if they think that intelligence is something that is fixed, that it's something that they're, you know, either capable of doing because of their brain structure or something like that, then the likelihood of success drops, as opposed to if they recognize that intelligence changes, it's malleable. So there's a couple of experiments and interventions done to change that. So for example, when you tell a student, oh, you're so smart, you are kind of, without recognizing it, maybe you're targeting intelligence as something that is fixed, that it's something of part of their character. But if you tell the student, oh, well, you can tell that you worked really hard here because your grade was excellent, then just by doing that, just that simple change is enough to actually, make them be more successful. One of the things that's very interesting here is that, again, it's not enough to let them know, okay, your brain is malleable. It's just those little actions that we do throughout our interactions with them that will kind of indicate whether or not we are applying those social psychological interventions properly. Another thing that these studies found is that negative intellectual stereotypes do affect students. So if there's a stereotype, for example, that if you belong to a particular ethnic group, then you're classified, just because you're falling into that group, as someone that has lower intelligence, then that is going to affect and reduce the achievement level, because they have that kind of weighing on them. Another study found that if we change the way that students view negative events, that can have an impact on retention. So for example, if you think that getting a failing grade is a reflection of who you are as an individual, and you take that to heart, then the likelihood of dropping out of the course is going to increase. But if you see negative events as challenges, then something can change. So when we look at a negative event and we see it, or we turn something like a conflict or a negative event into a challenge, then that's more motivating. And finally, Walton and Cohen here talked about the uncertainty that people feel when they don't find a group they belong to. So by looking at group inclusions in unfamiliar settings and creating activities where students are going to be included, then that will go ahead and increase their level of belonging. And then the idea here is that they'll find the social support that they need to be able to accomplish their goals. So now, how can we change students' attributions? And that's the question that that we want to answer. So now I want to just talk a little bit about college life and then let Dr. Acosta take over. So the project College Life is our hope is that it's going to be centered on just answering the question. Hopefully, more questions will be answered as the project continues, but just trying to change those attribution in students. So, Dr. Acosta, I'll let you take over.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you guys are here, or you all are here. I'm trying not to use the word or the phrase guys for general people. But anyway, I want to just emphasize that this is really Crisol's baby, and I'm so glad that she, we don't need the video just yet, Janice. Thank you. Sorry. I'm so glad that she invited me because I just love this approach. It's something that sounds easy, and it can be easy in terms of implementing it, right? But yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chats. Okay, but also I was so drawn to it and excited to be working on this because of some personal experiences I had. And if you recall your time going through school, you may have had something similar, or I mean, hopefully not. But before we get into the actual what Crisol and I did for our project, or to start our project, I wanted to share sort of an anecdote. So overall, in college, I've had a pretty good experiences. Good professors. I did great in some classes, others not so great. But there was one experience in grad school that really, it was somewhat, well, traumatizing. I'll use that word. It was traumatizing. And just like what Crisol was talking about, attributing or helping students attribute positive ideas out of experiences. I had one professor who took that to the complete opposite. If you think of that image that Crisol put up of the books and the stools, just to share a little bit about how this professor approached their class. This was an older white professor, and this professor's philosophy was essentially putting the books really high up, putting students in the class with only one stool, and it was the strongest student that got the stool first was the winner, right? And the way that the other students were made to feel was that we weren't good enough to accomplish this class. Even though I won't state exactly what we had to do, but even though what it put us through wasn't targeted on the class. Anyway, so what that left me with was I already had, I'm a first generation college student, so I couldn't go to my parents and ask them for advice on how just to like register, do things like that. So I already had those anxieties. And as I continued in my career, I had this experience that just made me, and it really lended to this my feeling of imposter syndrome that I suffered for years through graduate school, even at the beginning. I think I probably am feeling less and less of it. So I get some twinges of it still. And so that's why I was so excited to work on this project, because we can change those attitudes. We can help our students think more positively about their experiences, which will then make them stronger students. So what we ended up doing for our first gathering was a movie night. We essentially, because I think as Crisol mentioned, that attribution only works if you don't say that you're doing it, right? It has to be sort of stealthily done. If you say, I'm doing this project, students, to help you do better, then it just won't work. So we presented this as a movie night. And we chose, does anyone want to guess what kind of movie we chose to show? Just out of curiosity. Oh, 15 minutes. Okay, just kidding. We won't do many guesses. But we ended up showing Legally Blonde with not Renee Zellweger, not her. What's her name? Oh, Reese Witherspoon. So this is a fun, yeah, it was a fun movie. I'm going to assume many of you know what we're talking about, what we've seen. It's basically this really, really sweet sorority girl, blonde, bubbly, fashion major, and her boyfriend breaks up with her because he wants somebody that's smart. And so she said, well, I'm going to go to Harvard then. And so it turns out that she ends up going to Harvard, becoming the valedictorian, proves not only her boyfriend wrong, but I think even the audience, because the audience has assumptions about her. So we showed this movie, and then we had this fantastic discussion after with our students. And I'll share some of those questions once we show this clip.
I'll show you how valuable Elle Woods can be. I'm gonna show the world those spring for me that sometimes they can't see. Don't ask.
Wasn't gonna.
But I prove that I can conquer anything. So from my head to toe, I'm taking full control. I'm making it on my own this time. I love that song. No. Watch out for the knockout. And I won't stop till I'm on top now.
Is she reading books?
You filed a claim. What next? Ms. Woods?
Don't you need to have evidence?
Meaning?
Meaning you need reasonable belief that your claim should have, like, evidentiary support?
And what kind of evidentiary support does this case require?
Get on, Uncle Ben.
Coming back a second with Frank Lucas, Mark Jacobson, and Richard Robert Martin. In the article, you talk about all sorts of things, corrupt cops who are dealing
And the purpose of diminished capacity is
to negate mens rea?
Okay, so that was just a short clip, but basically what ends up happening is, and that what we talked about with our students is that Elle Woods, the main character, does make these changes in terms of approaching school, but she still maintains her true self, right? You saw her getting her nails done, her hair done, working out, and so it's really inspiring, right? And so when we met with our students, we had a great discussion. I think we started at 7, and I think we went with them up until about 10. We had a good group of students show up. I want to say there were about 20 of us. This is our first attempt, this is our first project for the long-term project. And so Crisol and I are still kind of figuring out times and dates and how to best approach our students. So in my case, because I had already planned the semester out, I offered this as an extra credit opportunity. And so in terms of measuring student retention, I'm going to be focusing on those students who attended and see how they track in their grades during the semester. However, what I might find is that, and this is probably true for you all too, that when students are offered extra credit, not at the end of the semester, the ones who take advantage of it are usually ones who don't need it. So in the future, what I plan to do is build these types of projects into the course as graded assignments required for everyone to do better tracking or measuring of retention or even grades between between these types of activities. And so I want to share with you, I know we're running out of time, but just a few questions that we had asked our students during the discussion after the movie. So one of the questions is, what are some obstacles that Elle had to overcome to be taken seriously as a law student? What did she do to overcome these obstacles? Did she change as a person in order to overcome these obstacles? There is an old adage saying, don't judge a book by its cover. How does Elle defy stereotypes? And as you were watching the movie, even if you've seen it before, how do you feel about Elle's chances of getting into Harvard? So this got us discussing about our own assumptions we have of other people. And then finally, what obstacles have you faced as a college student, and what did you do to overcome them? And so even though Elle Woods isn't, Liz Acosta or other students here, those questions really had our students thinking about their own experiences and really opening up about them, talking about obstacles they've encountered, talking about stereotypes. Something that we talked about too that was really, I think, smart and enlightening for the students was that even though Elle overcomes a lot of assumptions and stereotypes in order to become a Harvard valedictorian, we did make the notation, right, that, well, she's also a very privileged young lady who comes from wealthy parents. And so we included that into our discussion too. And the students just really had mind-blowing, I think, for me, things to share about themselves in terms of discussing the movie. And then what I did after this was then for the students who did attend the film and discussion, I then followed up with sort of a questionnaire. It was just a couple of questions to ask them to discuss their big takeaways or any ways that the movie and the discussion resonated with them. I haven't gotten those back yet, so I can update and follow up. But the idea is, this is sort of you've probably felt this before. You've watched a movie and you felt really pumped up afterwards. You might not know exactly why, but we're hoping to do that with this movie with our students to help with their attribution, right? What can we do to be successful in this class? I hope this makes sense. I want to leave time for questions so we could illuminate, but I want to thank you all for joining. Crisol, if you wanted to add anything else to this section, or maybe talk a little bit about what you did in your class.
Okay, so I did do something similar to you, and we're still collecting data, so we're going to be monitoring our students. But one of the things that I do want to add is just give you some idea of some of the future events that we're planning. So we're planning to create a video with testimonies from students talking about their success, not just current students, but students who've already transferred to maybe a 4-year college or university. We also want another like video of instructors sharing their own success so that they could also have that, like students have connections to their instructors, and then they could see us even as maybe like role models. Of course, that will be up to them to decide. There's also another event that I would eventually like to try, which is to have a room where students and instructors come together over coffee or maybe some light food and talk about college experience and expectations and open up that conversation of what we could do to just make all of us feel included, not just students versus teachers, but to recognize that we're all part of one community. So if you are interested in being part of this project, please let me know or Dr. Acosta know. We would love more input from people, and we would love it if more faculty and also staff members were part of this project, and hopefully it's something that that can grow. At least we hope that it can. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add that I use the term, something that we did earlier was easy. And I feel like that wasn't the right term, but there's so many things that we can do that I guess that are easy, but incredibly impactful for the students. But if you think about like sort of my anecdote about that professor who just sort of kind of hazed us or whatever, and it stuck with me for a long time. Having these positive turn can be, not can be, but also needs to be sustainable and consistent, right? And we have to do it over time. So even though we had this this first film and hoping to do great for our students, Crisol and I would like to keep going with this because we know that just like negative feedback or negative or traumatic experiences stay with us for so long, right? Or because there's a pattern, we need to have a pattern of this positive approach as well. So thank you all. We look forward to working with you.